Moin YouTube. It's another very nice and sunny day here in Hamburg, and today we'll take a walk through two very historical and one very modern district. Let's go. So what looks majestic now wasn't always like that. Back in the 1800s, this area was known as the Gängeviertel, or corridor quarter if you want. The houses were built so densely and there was such a high population density and very, very narrow alleys separating the houses that it had some dire consequences actually. In 1842, a major fire destroyed 1/3 of the old Hamburg, and in 1892, a cholera epidemic struck the area. So by the end of the 19th century, it was decided to rebuild the whole area. And what is today the Kontorhausviertel, which basically means office building quarter, was constructed. So where we are going to go next is the so-called Speicherstadt, which roughly translates to warehouse city. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most beautiful parts of Hamburg. Perfect timing for a tourist boat to come by. All right, here we are in the heart of the Speicherstadt. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Rows of red brick warehouses built right on the water on oak piles. But this wasn't just about storing stuff, it was about dodging taxes. Legally, of course. Back in the 1880s, Hamburg had a little dilemma. Germany wanted to join a national customs union, basically one big tariff zone. But Hamburg said, hold up, we're a trading city, import taxes would kill our business. So after some heavy negotiations, a compromise was struck. Hamburg joined the union in 1888, but carved out a special customs-free area, right here in what became the Speicherstadt. That meant you could bring goods in from anywhere in the world, store them here, and only pay customs if they entered the rest of Germany. Clever, right? So from tea and coffee to carpets and spices, this was where the goods waited. Traders could even sample the merchandise here before deciding what to import or resell it overseas without paying a cent in customs. The warehouses were state of the art for their time, connected by canals for loading from ships and walkways for moving stuff around on foot. It was all about efficiency, long before Amazon. This customs-free status lasted over 100 years. It wasn't fully revoked until 2003, when the EU's customs system took over. By then, most of the old trade had already moved to bigger, modern container terminals. But the Speicherstadt stayed, like a living monument to Hamburg's free trading past. In the early 1900s, Speicherstadt was the world's most modern logistics hub. Even today, some of the warehouses still operate as storage, but most are now used as offices, museums, cafes, or creative spaces. The Speicherstadt warehouse district was built between the 1880s and 1920s to basically store goods that arrived at the port of Hamburg, including cocoa and coffee, tea, spices, and it's still used today even for maritime equipment and electronics. And for some reason, one third of the world's Oriental rug production went through here in 2005 for some reason. But there is another side to the Speicherstadt that's not always front and center, and it's more uncomfortable. Many of the goods stored and traded here, like coffee, tea, tobacco, and spices, came from colonies or former colonies, often tied to exploitative systems. Hamburg was deeply entangled in global colonial trade, and this district was one of its key hubs. So while the Speicherstadt showcases clever logistics and economic ambition, it also reflects a time when wealth in cities like Hamburg came at a cost elsewhere. That doesn't mean we shouldn't admire the architecture or the history, but it does mean we should be aware of all the stories these walls could tell.
Die Waren wurden mit den Haken hochgezogen zu den großen Kulturen. Das ist die Lagerfläche hier der Speicherstadt. Die geistliche Lagerfläche wird am Boden auf die gebrachten Kunden. Da hat man die Waren wie Tee, Kaffee, Kakao, Orte, Teppiche, Kautschuk, Baumwolle zum Beispiel. Allerdings der Quartiersweise, der Bereich hier, wie soll man es harmlos sagen, betrieben hat, hatte mehr mit Schreiben zu tun als mit Arbeit. Weil die rechte Hand verkauft wurde, der Hauptsache ist Freiheit.
As we cross this long footbridge, we are literally walking from one era of Hamburg into the next. Back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this whole area from Speicherstadt all the way into what's now Hafen City was part of the Freihafen, Hamburg's customs free zone. Goods arriving by ship could be stored, sorted, and traded without ever technically entering German territory. It was a major deal for merchants and a key reason Hamburg became one of Europe's busiest ports. For decades, the free port kept expanding, pushing further south and east into the harbor as trade grew. Warehouses, docks, and logistics hubs dominated this whole landscape. But over time, the global economy shifted. Container shipping took over, and the port moved downstream to accommodate those giant ships and cranes. Suddenly, this prime real estate, right here in the heart of the city, was no longer needed for cargo. So Hamburg reimagined it. Bit by bit, starting in the early 2000s, the Freihafen was dismantled, and Hafen City rose from the old docklands. What used to be off limits to most of the public is now home to modern architecture, a university, museums, restaurants, and apartments with a view. It's one of the biggest urban redevelopment projects in all of Europe, and it all starts right here on the other side of this bridge. And there it is, the Elbphilharmonie, or as we used to call it for years, Elbfiasko. Okay, so I'm right in front of Hamburg's newest landmark, the Elbphilharmonie, or Elbe Concert Hall, if you want. I will tell you more about that building later, but it's supposed to have, well, actually it has, I've been there, a very nice viewing platform, so let's go have a look. Originally planned to open in 2010 with a budget of around 77 million euros, the whole thing turned into a construction nightmare. Delays piled up, strikes, lawsuits, and a completely blown budget followed. And by the time it finally opened in 2017, 7 years late, the bill had ballooned to over 860 million. That's right, from 77 to 860. Let that sink in. But here's the plot twist. Against all odds, the Elbphilharmonie turned out to be amazing. Acoustically, it's world class. Architecturally, it's bold and beautiful, a shimmering glass wave perched on top of an old brick warehouse. And the public plaza we're on? A gift to the city, with one of the best views in Hamburg, open to anyone, tickets are free. These days, no one really talks about the budget anymore, or at least not with the same anger. The Elfie has somehow managed to go from scandal to icon, from disaster to darling. And honestly, she earned it.
Wir haben noch 4 Stunden.
So until recent history, like a bit over 20 years ago, this was all part of the port, and you can still see that everywhere. They kept a lot of the quays and built the new buildings on them, and they also kept some of the structures like cranes.
Kommt auch irgendwie nicht dazu.
But if you go back even further in history, like to the Middle Ages, this was just the island of Grasbrook, which was simply unprotected marshland, which was subjected to flooding. And they kept cattle here, and the island also featured a place for executions. Over 400 pirates were decapitated here, and when they built the Hafen City, they actually found some of their skulls and moved them to a museum. Today, Hafen City still navigates growing pains. It's an urban experiment full of ambition, visually stunning, bold, and clean. But not yet a neighborhood you'd say has the lift and comfort of a classic Hamburg district. For example, if you live here and you own a dog, good luck finding a dog park or a decent green strip anywhere near you. And finally, we're entering Überseequartier, Overseas Quarter, the newest part of Hafen City and the one that feels most like a proper city. There's a bit of everything here. Cafes, restaurants, office spaces, apartments, and finally, the kind of things that turn a showpiece neighborhood into a livable one. We're talking supermarkets, a drugstore, even a few shops you'd actually go to without a visiting relative in tow. And there's more just completed: a cinema, a cruise terminal, hotels, and a new U-Bahn station, subway station. What's ironic is that Hafen City has been growing for over 20 years, but only now it is starting to get those everyday basics. If you live over on Kaiserkai near the Elbphilharmonie, it's still a solid 10 to 15-minute walk just to pick up a shampoo or a couple of groceries. For a while, the whole district felt more like an architect's dream than a neighborhood. But Überseequartier is changing that. It's still slick and modern, sure, but there's a bit more pulse here. Less urban showroom, more actual city. And with this view of the brand new Westfield shopping mall and the nearly finished cruise terminal area, I say goodbye for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next week for the next walk.